welcome to the last session of our Nurturing Young Leader webinar series on COVID-19 impact on real estate. Today, we are very pleased to have three very distinguished alumni and also our graduate to come and share with us from the public sector responses to this COVID-19 impact. So, three speakers are Ms. Tong Wai Ling from Assistant Chief Executive from Land Operation, Assistant Commissioner of Lands, Singapore Land Authority. I will introduce her further later on before the start of the session. We also have Goh Chin Chin, Group Director, Development Control, Urban Redevelopment Authority, and then the last speaker will be Nam Pek Yen, Tax Director, Property Tax Division, Industry Branch, Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore. And as we know, these are the three government agencies where we have a lot of our graduate working in these three agencies. I think our three speakers have actually been with them for, rose up to the rank to a very senior position here. So maybe to start the session, I would like to first introduce Wai Ling. Wai Ling is actually the Assistant Chief Executive Land Operation of the Singapore Land Authority and overseeing the land acquisition and purchase, land transfer and land sale, and also land asset management division. She holds a concurrent statutory appointment as Assistant Commissioner of Lands. She also, my former classmate, also the colleague of Helen, right? Helen at Min Law and SLE. Wai Ling graduated from National University of Singapore with Bachelor of Science in Asset Management, second class upper division honors. She also holds an Executive Master of Business Administration from NUS. She was seconded to the Ministry of Law for 10 years, where she was involved in negotiation of several free trade agreement as well as amendment to the Land Acquisition Act to pay market value compensation. Upon her posting back to SLA, she oversaw major acquisition projects such as North-South Corridor and Thomson East Coast Line. These are very important infrastructure projects. So today we have Wai Ling to first share with us some of these past public sector responses.
Thank you, Tian Fu, for having me. And thank you to the School of Real Estate for inviting us to speak. I'm Wai Ling, I'm from the Singapore Land Authority. I've been asked to talk about government responses to COVID, but I thought you can read them from the budget statements so far that have been published about what government had done in response to COVID. So I thought it'd be more useful to distill, insights from what's happening around the world and discuss how we can address, as a nation, address some of this issue and adapt in this new environment. Now, this slide shows the state of the global economy. COVID is not just a health pandemic, as we all know. It's caused significant impact and hardship on the economy and also on the social compact of many societies. It has severely disrupted global and local economic activities, ranging from aviation to retail to hotels, and including many aspects, F&B as well. And in recent months, many countries are actually reporting second and third wave of COVID. And as a result of, with all this cumulatively, IMF has projected global growth to contract by about 5% in 2020. And based on IMF projection that you can see here from the chart, they are actually quite optimistic that they think that global growth is likely to go up in 2021 for the global economy. And then if you look at it, drill it down into a little bit further, advanced economy, the contraction is actually more severe for 2020. But overall, we should all, from all the three economies, whether you're from the advanced economies or from the emerging markets and developing economies, you're likely to see a growth in projection after 2020. I'd like to talk a little bit about geopolitical tensions because this has a very close correlation to what we are seeing as we are reeling from the impact of COVID. Geopolitical tensions are putting global economy at real risk, and COVID has exacerbated it. WTO has actually projected global trade to drop by about up to close to 30%. And frankly, we think that, or my personal view is that countries actually should rally and cooperate during these very challenging times. But Unfortunately, that's not what we see on the ground. We see countries have become more inward-looking due to rising nationalism and protectionism. As you've seen from US, it's always about putting my own country first, my own nation first. It's beggar thy neighbor kind of policies that you see nowadays. So I thought of sharing with everybody these three pictures, which at least summarized the current state of our economy, ranging from tourism, retail, and also aviation. Of course, there's also hotel is also reeling from the fallout as well. We are actually a red dot, everybody knows that, with no natural resources. So the concern is that how are we going to continue? Are we able to come out from it strong? We've long thrived on globalization and an open international operating environment because we depend heavily on trade. But given the current situation where there is a limit in terms of travels, aviation, and there's also with the situation that you see in the geopolitical tension that you see between US and China, we now have to adapt to this rising trend of what I call, or what many people call, deglobalization. So in the absence of such global leadership, there are opportunities, actually, in my personal opinion, for regionalism and also bilateral new coalitions. It does not mean that life has to come to a standstill. That's where we have to put on our thinking hat, think out of the box to see how we can put Singapore plug back into this world economy and seek out new opportunities, whether through regionalism or bilateral options. So to remain relevant, Singapore has long been known for our brand, for our branding and our reputation for being able to deliver. And this has become even more important in these very challenging times, that we have to build on and enhance on our reputation to be able to deliver and to continue to attract investments. This slide, I'd like to share a little bit about the impact on Singapore economy. It shows our GDP record plunge on a year-to-year basis and also on a quarter-to-quarter basis. We are in technical recession. GDP is expected, MTR has stated that our GDP is expected to shrink between 4 and 7% this year. And needless to say, and we all know that businesses are badly affected and unemployment rate correspondingly is expected to go up. And in the first half of this year, our Singapore Finance, the Ministry of Finance has rolled out 4 budgets in quick succession, which I summarize them as first. Think of it, I try to fondly think of it as, you know, government trying to help cushion its people from the chills of COVID. So you have your Fortitude, the latest is the Fortitude budget, the Unity, the Resilience and the Solidarity budget. These measures, I think, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, is that you can read about what the government has done, the measures introduced from these 4 budgets, from the various budget statements and online articles. Pik Yen, my colleague from IREUS, will cover a little bit more on the measures that are related to real estate. So I will not go into details on that. Okay. But instead, I'd like to talk about more broadly how we are going to prepare for the future and what paradigm shifts and mindset shifts that are required from government officers and also probably in terms of from businesses as well. My own personal opinion is that the situation is still evolving and it may take years to stabilize. So people have asked, is this a transitional or structural change? It depends on, I think, which aspect you're talking about, which industry you're talking about. But one thing is sure, is that digital government and businesses will become mainstream. And it's already happening now that where digitalization, especially from the government side, is already going out in full steam. So relating to that of a digital government and digital businesses, what then is important is that issues relating to cybersecurity, digital infrastructure, and up-to-date legislation are important to make sure that you have a sound, secure operating environment for government to deliver its services to its people and for businesses to conduct their business. Changing mindsets and paradigms. So while we talk about, the numbers are not good, supply chains have been disrupted, certain industries are more badly hit than others, it is actually not the case of all gloom and doom. There are some good things or developments that have come out from COVID. And I see that, or everybody can see that COVID has accelerated digitalization across sectors and countries. Never have we seen such rapid pace of adoption of digitalization in recent years until now. And it has also accelerated, the second advantage is that it has also accelerated cross-border data flows and talent as well. So maybe I need not, fiscally recruit a person, let's say from US to work in Singapore, to be physically working in Singapore, but he can be working for us. A company can recruit some of these talents all over the world. Or Singaporeans can be recruited by any companies, worldwide companies, MNCs as well, working remotely for these companies as well. So that, to me, is something that we can see as opportunities, need not necessarily see it as a threat. So coming back to real estate then, we all know that actually for real estate, they generally have a longer time lag due to your construction. You need time even for retrofitting, renovations, all these need time. And when you're talking about operating in a digital economy, it's all about being agile. It's all about being flexible. Then how then do we fit in? I think that's our greatest challenge here. And as policymakers, I'm speaking for myself here, not really representing my organization. I think the concern is that if I'm a policymaker, how then can I facilitate businesses to continue to operate or to be able to compete effectively in this kind of global environment? How are we able to have flexibility in our policy formulation? Flexibility can also come in terms of planning. How am I able to introduce flexibility in land use planning? For example, allowing change of use, quick conversion, time-based usage. I'm not too sure. But I think Chin, my colleague Chin from URA, will cover a little bit more on all these related planning issues. The other trends that everybody, many people have talked about, for example, which we all know, your remote learning has more or less taken root. Telecommuting is now an oft-used term. Previously, it was kind of taboo when you talk about telecommuting. So now it is commonplace. The issue in terms of real estate or for policymakers is this. Is there a need to look at the space norms for schools, for offices, even in terms of infrastructure planning, for example, your roads, because now people tend to revolve around their living environment, their homes. They may not need to travel, because you can work remotely anywhere. So what does it mean in terms of infrastructure planning for planners? We also witness a change, unprecedented change in consumer behavior. Online shopping, I mean, for myself, I have recently adopted online shopping as a result of the CB measures. I never dared to venture into online shopping. But with this change in consumer behavior, what does it mean for our retail landscape? Are we looking at more experiential kind of retail scene? Do you still need your brick and mortar physical retail space? So the issue of Orchard Road, what is the future for Orchard Road becomes important. And that's where I think government and businesses should collectively think about it. And we always, government will always welcome, I see ourselves as not having the monopoly of ideas, and that we will always welcome feedback from the industry players. Video conferencing, like what we are doing now, it has enabled anyone all around the world to actually sign in and dial in to attend conferences, seminars. So what is the impact on MICE venues and facilities? So many MICE venues and facilities worldwide are suffering. The rise of digital banking, as I mentioned, I didn't know how to go on to online shopping, and I also just recently adopted digital banking. So these are the changes that we see. I don't go to the bank anymore. So increasingly, we may see that the banks will become invisible to the public, but they appear virtually everywhere, virtually. So what does it mean for banks then? Do they need to have a HQ in all cities or only in key cities? If it's only in key cities, then how do they choose which city? How do we make sure that Singapore is one of their city of choice? I think these are pertinent questions that we have to ask ourselves. And then how are we able to attract these top MNCs to have their site offices, HQ, headquartered in Singapore? So also related to the issue of banking, your finance institution will be then, the question is, what will happen to our CBD? We have one, and we're talking about second CBD in Jurong East. Is there a need for all to have this CBD? What is the concept of CBD? I think that needs some thinking through. Hospitals, step-down care. We are talking about aging population. So government has already started to beef up our step-down care, such as nursing homes and rehabilitation centers and all that for the elderly folks. But with COVID, there's a greater need for segregation, distancing. There's also a need to ensure that if we are affected by a pandemic, health pandemic, then how do you make sure that you have your medical facilities well distributed, that people do not need to travel by great distance to reach these places, to reduce the risk of transmission and infection? I think these are issues as planners, as policymakers, that we seriously need to give some thought to. Many people have also talked about just in time versus just in case. And Singapore has always prided itself in being a very good just-in-time JIT center. Your goods come here, come to your ports, and then how do you make sure it's properly stored and then quickly distributed to the warehouses or to the factories and to the end consumers? Your logistic planning is very important. So it's all just in time. Make sure that you reduce inventory, you reduce storage, you reduce all this opportunity cost. But does it mean that we go all out and because of COVID, it means that we swing to the other extreme, that you only just build resilience, that you forgo on the just-in-time concept? I personally, I think that there is still a role for just-in-time in terms of delivery of service to the consumers, in the sense that, for example, you cut down waiting time. You are able to make use of technology to tell you, okay, your queue number, you're how many persons away from in front of you. Cut down waiting time, that in the meantime you can do other things, so that your time of 24 hours has now become 48 hours or even longer. Just in case then, resilience kind of building, there's a need for it. And that's where the focus on essential goods become paramount. So we're talking about potentially medical supplies, food security, and these are the things which are critical for a country in terms of operating in such kind of health pandemic should consider. And for such kind of building of resilience, then it is also closely tied to your land use planning. How do you make sure you have enough kind of the manufacturing capacity for it, the storage facility for some of these goods and services. At the snap of the finger, when you need it, you have them. So that's in terms of your just in case and just in time. But I think I will stop here. I welcome questions, and I hope that this should not be a monologue kind of session. I really hope that it can be a free flow of exchange of ideas and views, and see how we can. After all, we are here for the good of our country, and I really hope that we can collectively come up with solutions so that we can weather this storm together as a country. Thank you.
Thanks, Wai-Ling. Disclaimer is that this sharing is actually doesn't represent the view of the organization. Actually, it's a personal opinion. So, okay. So the second speaker, thanks, Wai-Ling, for talking about quite a number of these challenges we face, especially at the macro international perspective. We'll move on to the next speaker, second speaker, probably look at more on the planning perspective. The second speaker is actually Ms. Goh Chin Chin. She's currently the Group Director, Development Control at Urban Redevelopment Authority. Chin Chin leads her team of planner in collaboration with developer and building professional to develop Singapore, providing guidance and planning approval for development projects in Singapore. She is also responsible for engagement with stakeholders and the review of regular policy and development control guidelines to ensure that URA policy remain relevant and useful. And prior to her current portfolio, she also been involved in strategic long-term planning and review of the master plan for Singapore. This includes study like related to planning for greenery, infrastructure project, including the rail project, and also the airport terminal 5. We invite Chin Chin to share with us from the planning perspective how the government responds to this COVID-19. Chin Chin.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Wai-Ling has done a very macro perspective of economy and how Singapore is affected. And she has also put forth a lot of questions, planning questions as well. And actually, the breadth and depth of planning issues is really very, very broad. And I don't think I want to spend all the time here to talk about everything, but essentially, I wanted to share with you public sector responses. I think it's three key things. One is how we're being responsive, fast about it, and flexibility, and then finally talking about forward looking. Okay, so in terms of being responsive to changing trends and impact from COVID, I think throughout this series you have heard from many experienced industry stakeholders who have given you a lot of inputs, and I don't think I will be able to cover the breadth or the depth of what they have shared with you, but I do think that definitely some of the things that are on your mind would be that now that we see a lot more people working from home, then the issue of livability is something that that has come forth, and when people work from homes, then the questions in terms of the amenities close to home, the amenities near to commercial areas, how should it be? I think these are trends that we are observing and monitoring and trying to see, how could we better respond to them. And even if you've realized that truly wellness is something that it's a very buzzword now, and what does it mean in terms of the well-being, health and well-being of towns and buildings. And these are issues that not just URA, but even HDB in planning for the HDB towns are looking closely into, in terms of how the town is planned to bring out the well-being of the residents. Of course, without me saying, even before COVID, I think climate change issues are already high on the priority of many. And I do know, I mean, like many of my younger colleagues, they are very conscious. They would bring their own meal equipments, utensils when they go and buy the tapao and all. I think that's a good sign, because actually it does show the heightened awareness of Singaporeans pertaining to environmental issues. even what they can do in their small part. And these have been issues that that we have been monitoring and responding to in terms of thinking about how can we meet climate change, what can we do to mitigate the impact of climate change. So you would also see that like many agencies have put forth plans to incorporate solar panels into their buildings and to be more self-sufficient in terms of energy. Of course, the other aspects is also resiliency, and that has, I think, through COVID brought the issues a lot more upfront, because one of the key things was really our supply chain, ensuring that the food that we stock, it's available. And you will also have seen the papers about the 2030 plan. How do we want to increase our food resiliency to have more farms so that we can meet our basic needs? Yeah. So other than that, I think the other thing that has come out from COVID is really about safe building designs. I know many of you would now think about, oh, how do you do contactless doors so that when you can kick the door and open without touching it because of COVID. I think these are also things, that trends that we are seeing, and what does it have an impact in terms of planning? Does it mean more space needed for buildings? I think these are things that we are responding to as well. So on flexibility part, I mean, specifically for URA, because we are involved in the land use planning aspects, we are very conscious that actually we need to be flexible to meet business needs, especially during this time. So some of the things that we looked at in terms of policy and also processes. So for policy, I think Wai-Lin spoke a little bit about being flexible in changing users. I mean, we all know that with the current climate, retail spaces, office spaces, there is some impacts on the demand. And if there are vacant spaces, I think we have been actively facilitating requests if there is a request to change the use of such premises to make better use of such spaces. Government agencies have generally been facilitative to do that. For processes wise, I mean, we have also recognized the current situation and the need to respond to it. So say, for example, I think when COVID circuit breaker started, we know that all the building works had to cease, or non-essential building works had to cease, and some of the people, say, who were doing renovation to their homes were affected. And when they were allowed to commence their operations, some of them had come to us to say that, hey, you know, I just need another 1 month or two to finish up my work. Can I not extend my written permission for it? And we had taken a look at those circumstances and agreed that yeah, we would accord that flexibility for them not to extend the written permission just to finish up the work. And we also touched base with BCA so that they would be able to get their TOP without this extra administrative hurdle. So these are things that government sector has done. I mean, they are not big things, but I think these are small things that matter during times like this. Yeah. The last thing I wanted to talk about was forward-looking. I suppose public service has always asked ourselves, you know, what can we do to bring Singapore to SG 100? So even before COVID, the question asked about our CBD, what is the role and relevance of our CBD? These are questions that we have been looking at, and even if you're aware that when we released Master Plan 2019, there was a whole set of CBD incentive scheme that was rolled out, which allowed some of the existing developments, office developments, if they were to redevelop, to incorporate, say, a residential or hotel component, we would even give them bonus GFA to allow them to redevelop. And that's because we have observed through other key cities in the world, and also from consultancy studies, that there is still a relevance for our CBD. However, we would need to continuously think of how we want to keep it vibrant. And keeping it vibrant would mean that actually there needs to be a mix of users so that the place will continue to be kept alive, and not in the past where where your CBD the daytime is buzzing with office workers, and then nighttime is a dead space. That is not what we want, and therefore the incentive seeks to bring in a living population such that the city will be kept alive with activities 24/7. And even with COVID, that strategy would, I mean, in my view, will still be relevant, because as people work from their homes, it will mean that yes, there is still that resident population within a city center that will bring about the life that will continue to be served by the amenities in that area, and that would make us a more active city that people can enjoy. And personally, I feel that somehow a CBD has always been someone, I mean, in everyone's mind, places iconic characteristic to a place. I mean, if you think of major cities in the world, I think you always think of their CBDs with their skyline and all, and that makes up that image of that city. And therefore, I mean, personally, I feel that there is still the need for our CBD. But as to the strategy for decentralization and all, I think that's something that we are observing, and we're looking at and seeing how we can tailor and adjust the plans accordingly. Yeah. So the other part I thought I wanted to specifically address is really I think the question asked in terms of skill sets that we think that our future graduates should have. While everybody may say that COVID has affected us, yes, maybe this year it's a little bit challenging, but I want to encourage you that that it is not all doom and gloom. I mean, there are many internship opportunities that government has put forth to allow new graduates or even people who are looking for a change in career to try out and to learn new skill sets. And I will encourage you to take up these opportunities, because these are really opportunities for you to learn new skills and also to observe what's happening in the public sector. I think when you talk about digitalization, and the government has gone on it in a big way, truly so. Even for URA as a planning organization, we have taken on digitalization to be able to help us be more evidence-based in our planning. I think one of the outcomes you might have seen during COVID was when our digital labs came up. I collaborated with GovTech on the Space Out, where we could actually garner real-time information and allow people to see where people are at and size up whether that particular supermarket or that particular park is crowded or not. These are just some of the outcomes, but internally, then for URA's planning processes, we have gone a lot more evidence-based in also planning for, say, community facilities, in sizing up where the demographics of where the population is and where the needs are. So these are skills that I think as undergraduates you should actively look into them, because I think the ArcGIS, the skill sets in terms of Tableau and all the other visualization tools will come in handy. Of course, beyond the technical skills, I think soft skills will remain important no matter where you are, private sector, public sector. The soft skills will always come into play, and I would encourage each and every one of you to continue to consciously develop your soft skills in your EQ, your ability to network, ability to communicate, present well. Those are important skills. Of course, maybe I will set a bar very high, but I do think that as public servants, I always look out for colleagues who have a heart to understand. I mean, the truth is, even for URA, we constantly engage our stakeholders, because we don't want to plan in an ivory tower. Whatever we plan for is for the people of Singapore, for our stakeholders, and therefore the engagement process is important, because we do really want to know what is the ground settlement. We need to be close to the ground, and having that humility and the heart to listen and to understand the issues on ground would be very, very important. And the other point would be that I think it's always that strive to do better spirit, not just to do better today, but what can we do better? What can we do to prevent issues from arising? I think these are also skill sets or mindsets that I think will bring you and prepare you well for what is up ahead. So with that, I thank you.
Thanks, Chin, for sharing with us the planning landscape and also the urban planning aspect. I think it seems like we have moved a long way. We started with the garden city in the earlier years when, since independence, government trying to make the city more greens and more like garden city like. And then over the years, when the economic growth, people thinking about more quality, livability, sustainability, all these terms coming out. Then now, because of this pandemic, we also had to prepare for just in case all these black swan kind of event. So now it seems like planning also move a little bit toward more resilience and more prepared for all these pandemic kind of things. So thanks for sharing by Chin. And we didn't arrange the speaker in this way because it started with international economic perspective, very micro perspective. Then we go to the national level, land use planning. Next speaker actually is talking more on the real estate valuation aspect, more at the micro level. We have a third speaker, Ms. Nam Pek Yen. She's the Tax Director, Property Tax Division Industry Branch at the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore. Pek Yen is currently a Tax Director of the Property Tax Division with the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore. She has more than 15 years of experience in the public sector, public service sector, especially in JTC and IREUS. She has been involved in many different nature of work relating to real estate, including valuation, research, policy formulation, lease management, and industry facility planning and developments. She also a part-time lecturer, currently helping us to teach modules on statutory valuation in our Master of Science in Real Estate program. Today she's going to share with us a little bit more from the valuation perspective, from the Inland Revenues Authority point of view, how these public responses to the COVID-19 impacts on real estate. Priyan, your time.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Prof. Singh. So having heard from the two speakers, Wylin as well as Chin at a broad overview level. So now it goes a little bit on details down to some of the overarching things that IREDAS we are looking at, and some of from property tax angle, how had we been supporting it in one way or another. I would do a sharing of a deck slide just to quickly just put together what we had from the budget, and then subsequently down what have we been doing, right? So as you know, from IREDAS, we are a tax authority. A lot of our responses actually is actually very closely tied to the 4 budgets that has been announced this year, right? And we focus very much into a lot of not just how do we overcome and compact COVID-19, but as part of the whole budget is also on how do we emerge stronger as a country, looking at what are the changes that's coming out in towards the future, right? So it's also on the long-term perspective. Okay, so the IREDAS level of support that we have given and inputs and implementations, just do a quick summary of some of the tax measures that we had, not specifically just on property tax, but just a quick sum up. You had heard from the budget, the details are within all the public domains, but from a business angle and from the employee angles, we have been supporting it by various fronts, like things like even corporate tax rebates, right? Giving the 25% tax rebates to corporate tax for year of assessment 2020. Certain tax treatments are being accelerated, like more accelerated of write-off deductions. Say, for example, if you're doing some bit of, companies are doing some bit of renovation and refurbishment costs, they can actually accelerate it to allow the deductions and with the intent to eventually be able to lower the tax payable, helping businesses and individuals to allow them to have more time to pay up tax obligation is also something that we have been putting forth. At the start, at the utility budget, we actually allow auto extensions of installments for 2 months for companies that's on gyro. And then subsequently, we allow it to be auto deferment for even self-employed. And if you're individuals, you can always go in to apply for deferment of tax payment for a period of 3 months. These are measures that, as part of the entire government, we had been trying to help businesses and help individuals, because we understand that from a COVID standpoint, cash flow can be tight. So what can we best do? Of course, from filings, extensions of filing deadline is also something that we look at. We know that during COVID we have the circuit breakers. Companies are not able to open up or return back to their office, except for unless they are essential firms, right, operating. And all this has an impact to their ability to file their tax obligations and stuff. And we extended by a period of 1 to 2 months, depending on what they are. So include income tax payment, include for corporate tax, where they had to file in their estimated chargeable income, even GST and stuff like that, right? So very related back to real estate and a very local level, we started with the property tax rebates as part of the unity budget. If you recall back then, the property tax rebates was given up to 30% for commercial properties. And then when the impact of the COVID actually hits us even greater, right? The extent of the property tax rebates was actually enhanced as the second resilience budget, where it went up to as much as 100% rebates for certain categories of commercial properties, right? Rebates given by the government in during of economic shock and stuff, it's not new, right? But the percentage varied depending on the severity of the situation. And my personal recall is that this is one of the very major extent of property rebates that the government has actually extended to help the businesses, right? Of course, a very major change, or rather a key point that has been quite different as compared to the past SARS period, or even the global financial crisis back in 2008 or 2009, was the legislations that we put forth to get the property owners to pass on the property tax rebates that's been extended to the tenants. Okay, so in the past, when we say we grant the rebates is being extended to the owner actually subsequently kind of waive off certain aspect of the obligations to the tenant. But this is the first time that we ever do it, that we use the law to actually push for the pass on to be a requirement and a full obligation by the owner to do that. Okay, so the reason why this is generally done so is because we know that there are progressive owners that have passed on the property rebates after the measures was announced, but we also hear feedback that there are owners that did not do so, and therefore this change. And this reflects some of the things that the government has been doing, right? Hearing from the ground, knowing what are the issues in place, and quickly put in measures to allow things to flow so that we can meet and help and fulfill the objectives that we had. The most recent one as part of the 42 budget is the one that we put forth cash grant to relieve SMEs of their costs when they are operating in non-residential properties. Again, this is situations where generally the government won't come in to interfere with contract that's at a private basis, right? But we have to do so to actually give support to companies that we know that they may take a longer time to actually gear up and recover from the impact from COVID or even from the economic shock. So these are things that's very closely related back to the local real estate level, and it is still a constant review that we'll see and look at. And to support all this, a lot of times require, like I mentioned, a lot of communications, a lot of discussion. Actually, the rental relief scheme, actually, it was a very cross-agency effort, right? It's not just IREUS, MOF. We involve MinLaw. There's MCCY, EDB, JTC, ESG, Enterprise Singapore, and a whole suite of various agencies that comes together to allow all this to be made possible. So this is very related back to from a real estate angle. I mean, the details you can put it out from the public domain. IREUS has also the role of helping to disperse certain of these schemes. And these are also very important schemes to help our companies, businesses in terms of their cash flow, right? So you have read about the wage credit scheme. You have also know about the job support scheme, providing up to even 75% capped at 4,006 per month on workers' workforce, right? To ensure that jobs are being sustained and then family can continue to be able to have the necessary part of support, and even foreign workers levy rebates and stuff. I mean, IREUS are the ones that administer things, and from a government standpoint, it actually means that we have to do it fast, right? We need time to, well, we need time, but we also ensure that we have to do it fast so that the necessary schemes can be take off and then allow the money to flow to the economy, right, or to the businesses to help them in this period. From an IREUS level, because of the various schemes that we administer, the various tax measures that we had, and in the situations of circuit breakers, people are working from home and stuff, we also have to change and enhance our service channels. And this is quite across the board. It's not just IREUS. I think a lot of agencies across the agencies has been doing this to leverage on technology to help us to actually provide a better service. Because we exist to look from a policy standpoint, we also exist to actually provide a good service back to the public and to the taxpayer. So what have we been doing? We actually push out quite a fair bit of using virtual assistant, so they can use chatbot to if they have question, it comes to us through the chatbot and it can be answered. We also push out a lot of infographics, we push out tax guides, because all these measures and tax measures may not necessarily be easily understand by companies or individuals. So how do we best do it? So we make the information public. During the circuit breakers time, and before circuit breakers, actually we actually had measures to kind of stop the walk-ins appointment, right? Because of the reductions of the face-to-face situation, and we use video chat assistant to help us to service the public if they needed help thereafter. So these are things that the government looks at, and IREUS definitely is one of them to provide this kind of measures. At whole of government level, we deploy our resources. I mean, I don't just cover what earlier. I mean, across the entire government, we needed help in one way or another, and that's where the various government ministries, agencies all put together and be deployed. So for IREUS, we have more than 45 of our officers actually redeployed to like safe distancing ambassador. Actually, if you see from picture, both of them, the two chaps are actually from real estates. They are the alumni, right? They're together with me. They take on the role and do additional work area. We have officers that seconded over to MOH and MOM. So these are things that as whole government we look at. And of course, everything goes back to helping to serve the public in all. From a government standpoint and from everyone, and including from IREUS, the things going forward, you may ask, is how do we see things differently? I guess a lot of time it is being nimble in terms of our policy, being flexible in our policy. I mean, just on your personal views, right? From a policy that we had, at the end, there must also be a trade-off. There will be certain trade-off that we need to establish, right? And it's getting tougher and tougher because there are a lot of this kind of stuff, right? I see Chin nodding her head, right? These are challenging things that public servants had to consider, because it's not just one aspect. There is a lot of other impacts back to other agencies. And from a tax authority angle, and together with Ministry of Finance, our parent ministry, right? All this would comes with also fiscal policy, right? How do you allow to continue to ensure that Singapore's continue to be able to function from a tax collection point and stuff like that. All this needs to be balanced. No, it's just not that because we can just easily dish out money, you know, right? At the end, there's a need to actually be able to see what are the benefits, and all this needs to be considered. So that sets that very overarching consideration as well. When we considered a lot of all these measures and things, the impact back to the economy, impact back to the tax perspective, the tax collection, all this has to be considered. From valuation angle, how does it change? That was one of the questions that was being posed. Fundamentally, if you're talking about annual value, the annual value for property tax perspective is actually set off by a very strong principle and foundation that has been laid forth for a long time. So those fundamentals principles, I don't think personally it will change. But whether or not values change, I would think so, right? Because there's always a demand and supply angle. If there's certain changes from the planning point, that would be an impact to the values. And we constantly at IREUS point, we actually do monitor very closely. And like I mentioned, we in touch with our stakeholders, not from the government step boards. We also do it with the industrialists, with companies, with corporate owners, so that we can understand what is the situation, and then we refine the way we look at things differently, and then to ensure that actually at the point of assessment wise, it should be fair. It's not excessive, it's fair, it's transparent, it's reasonable, and people can understand it and reflect the necessary times. So all these are things that we are constantly been in the loop and working with different stakeholders. That's quite important to us as a whole of government, and together as part of the other external stakeholders lah. Yeah, so that's what I have.
Thanks, Pei Yin. First, maybe ask Wai Ling first. I think given all this geopolitical situation and also the tension, and also Singapore, as a small country, from the government perspective, in managing, in having some of this flexibility in managing some of these resources, how do we actually balance between resources to look into some of these crises, like for example, foreign worker dormitory, to provide more land for building dormitory compared to, because it's always a trade-off compared to actually having more land and trying to develop the economic growth like second CBD and so on. How the government balance and trade off some of these, given the resource constraint?
We need to turn around to set up swap facility for those workers who have been swapped and who are healthy. We need to put them in some of these quarantine facilities and all that. So very quickly at that time, we have some of our state properties, which we converted to house some of these foreign workers. So that helped to take care of the foreign workers. But resources-wise, I think you should know, we spent nearly 100 billion of our budget in terms of help, not just on foreign workers. There were help given to for people who under the job support scheme to make sure that we can help as many companies keep their workers for as long as possible. So that's one aspect. Of course, the other aspect will be in terms of your property tax rebates, your rental reliefs. These are all measures aimed at helping selected industries that are more badly affected by COVID than others in terms of their, for the tenants especially, to alleviate some of their cash flow and hardship issues. So it was a multi-pronged approach in terms of dedicating resources to various sectors, ranging from making sure that you swap your workers as quickly as possible, ensuring that they still receive some form of income during the period when they were not working, and also assistance to help the families as well. For example, your utilities kind of rebate. So it was looking at making sure that we help businesses, families, individuals, and companies to make sure that they are able to to ride out the storm. So the measures were targeted, and they were making sure that the money will go to where it is needed as well. So like what Big Ian talked about in terms of the rental rebates, we make sure that everybody co-share in terms of the burden on a wanted basis. So these are some of the ways that we look at. And when you ask about trade-offs, so trade-offs, definitely it depends on who are more deserving. So then you look at which industry is more badly affected than others, and then you devote or direct your resources to those industries that are in more urgent need than others. So that's how we prioritize our resources, limited resources, to help the various industries.
Yeah, it's important to have some of this flexibility, especially given the limited resources. So I think thanks, Riding, for sharing some of these policy, how government can actually act swiftly and quickly during this crisis period in mobilize some of the resources. Maybe let's go back to Chin Chin. I mean, many people have now moved from face-to-face kind of working environment to more telecommuting, commuting or working from homes. One of the questions, do we, I think just also, I think Wai Ling also mentioned about second CBD. Do we still need so much space in the CBD to, how about the strategies? What's the government's views on the decentralization of the CBD area?
I spoke a lot more about our CBD and the rejuvenating of our CBD, but those initiatives have already started even before COVID. But I think specifically the question from James was really now that we are seeing the trend of more working from home and telecommuting activities. I think specifically his question was, should there be more focus on decentralization, and then and whether rejuvenating of CBD will become less important. Okay, maybe the second part of the question about rejuvenating CBD, it's a long-term plan that actually we are looking at, and not something that is immediate. I mean, for any redevelopment to take place and for collectively an area to be developed and rejuvenated, that actually takes many years. So that is really a longer term plan where it will be materialized, I suppose, or we will see the fruits of the labor many years down the road. Yeah. So I think that strategy will still continue because personally, like I said, I think there's still a place for CBD in Singapore and for how we want to position ourselves in the global arena. Okay, but back to the question of whether, how about focusing on decentralization? I think we have been looking at decentralizing. If we look at the long-term strategic plans that have set forth, we've always said that we want to bring jobs closer to home. Now actually maybe this is the time, your job is in your home itself. You work from home. Yeah. But I mean, just a broad statement to say it, but I think that we, other than bring jobs closer to home, I think with what we are seeing, we are also looking at whether there is more opportunities to build centers, so-called satellite centers, for which people can tap into to work closer to home. I think during the COVID period, personally, I've seen also many requests or appeals where when people start to work from home, they start to see and hear a lot more things at home, and sometimes I think it's a real concern. For example, recently I saw a letter from a homeowner who was upset that his neighbor has started the renovation work and it's affecting him because he says that he's a lecturer and he cannot conduct his classes when his neighbors are doing the renovation. Of course, his request was very simple. His request was at least have the courtesy to tell me that the works are starting so that I can make alternative plans. And I think in line with that, we are thinking that perhaps, you know, where more people work from home, and then, you know, there will be times when they will be inconvenienced by things that their neighbors do. And if indeed the system can allow a good neighbor system, then on the part of the person, he also has got options available to him. For example, he can go to, say, the library and work from there, make arrangements to work there, and maybe even get a little room for which, if he needs to conduct his tutorial in that environment. So these are things that we are looking at, and how we can further develop and encourage that. Of course, while we seed the ideas, we also need people to come on board who want to participate, to implement and to operate such facilities. So I assure James that we are looking into it, but how fast we can get them moving will depend a lot whether such ideas are also taken up by the private sector or other agencies who have got plans that can dovetail to bring them to fruition.
So interesting sharing. I think there are quite a number of questions also at the valuation methodology. I think that maybe directly I pick in. So with this COVID impact, I think how would this affect our valuation, especially property assessment, DC rate, and also payment of SSD and so on? Again, maybe you want to share about whether is there any changes or any impacts on your assessment?
I think from valuation methodology, I don't see that as a very fundamental change, right? Typical valuation methodologies are that few. But what valuers would do is really to understand the market and know what is the impact back. From IREUS level, we had constantly been monitoring on the market scene. Whether the annual values are being revised, it very depends back to evidence base, right? How is the market? Do we see what sort of evidence that's coming forth? I mean, we had to look at specific on the properties and then see if there's an impact. Of course, that would then mean that there may be a need to actually do the revision. But that said, we also have to bear in mind from a resource prioritization angle, there are properties that is being granted 100% rebates, right? So what is the impact to adjust the annual value, for example, right? But if there are those that is continued to be tax payable, it makes a lot of sense. The market is actually moving downwards and there's very strong evidence that is reflecting so, then we had to do accordingly to reflect what the value is, right? Things like even if you're talking about whether how does it impact development charge, right? These are against back market-based evidence, but we have to consider, of course, what is the impact back to the market, you know, construction period, construction cost, you know, these are things that we have to look at. As a valuer, there's very few evidence, you know, market evidence today in the land sales to tell us where it is, but that doesn't mean that we cannot do, right? We have to take all the indicators, we have to take all the market evidence-wise to actually make the decisions. So these are things that we constantly be able to look at. There's also a question on even like seller stamp duty, right? Let's say companies actually do liquidate and stuff. Are these all being considered? But if you look at the budget kinds of measures and even as part of the COVID Temporary Measures Act, what the government has been laying forth is to relieve companies with their costs as much as possible to a large extent, right? So there are relief not just from the rental perspective, they are relief to talks about, you know, when they do hired purchase, their contractual agreement, what can they do, whether, you know, their creditors can step forward, you know, there are temporary periods that they can't do that, you know, so that these companies can continue to survive. The whole idea at the very forefront of the COVID is we say that we had to ensure that how to save jobs, right? Create jobs, save jobs. So all these are measures that put in place. Whether there's an impact back to SSD, I think at the end of the day is what kind of impact are we talking about? For now, there's not specific any, but what we are hoping the government is doing forth is that all these various measures actually sustain the company and help them to grow to the future when all this are being compacted, right? And then emerge stronger from a longer haul, you know, and then allow them to adopt the various transformation, you know. industry transformation maps has been there for quite a number of years. No, but it is constant changes that the company has to look at, and even the government has to update that and ensure that the company continue to do that. And as part of the budget measures or even other schemes that's available is to help these companies to actually transform and then make the change. Because if they're no longer valid and relevant, they will fall out, right? And that's affect back to livelihood. You know, at the end of the day, it's families and us. So these are things that the government has constantly been looking at, lah. Yeah. So no direct answer, but I mean, in a way, these are thoughts that the government has been putting forth and thinking about it. Right? As we continue to if there's a need to, I guess policy will comes in to help to fine tune when there's a major impact and shake. You know, that there's a need to call for action. Definitely, the government will step in to help to address that.
Seems like it's a challenging time now. A lot of uncertainty how this public health, this pandemic will actually affect some of these valuations and so on. I think there's another question, I think by Aaron, right? Is there a renewed urgency for rapid decentralization given how COVID impact has exposed our vulnerability arising from highly concentrated density in the central nodes? No? And then he was saying that the second CBDs seems to be progressing slow and compared to other areas. So how would this impact actually? Would this impact the rail or actually impacted this longer term kind of plan? Because I think all this is very much dependence. I mean, the planning's plan is very, the plan, urban plan, the physical plan, a lot depending on the economic growth as well to drive the implementation and execution of this. Any view, whether Wai Ling or Chin Chin, anything on this second CBD, how the slow work will probably affect some of these decentralization strategy? Yeah.
Maybe I'll start first.
Yeah.
I think definitely the market condition will have an impact on the pace of development. I mean, like I say, we are developing Singapore for Singaporeans, and if you know the market cannot absorb such spaces, then I think the pace of development will slow accordingly. So there will be an impact, but I suppose for us, for URA, we are looking at long-term development of Singapore, and therefore not just an immediate term. And therefore, yes, the plans will be there. Maybe it will take a longer time to fulfill, but that's okay because that's where the need is, and I don't think we are going to push ahead and develop it ahead of its time, because at the end of the day, I mean, if the buildings are completed and they are not optimized, then it's also a waste of resource as well. Yeah. So definitely in terms of timing, the market economy will play a part, and then we will have to relook and repace the development plans. Yeah.
I think the other aspect that you need to look at are the existing companies. They already are tied or lock into a certain on their tenancy arrangement and tenancy agreement. So it's not such a straightforward issue that they can just downsize immediately even if they want to. So it will probably come out at the next stage, which is when their tenancies or their leases are up for renewal. So probably at that stage, that's where they will start to negotiate with the landlord to look at how, you know, whether they want to downsize or maybe relocate to elsewhere or to allow for more telecommuting kind of arrangements. So that's how I see it as well. To add to Chin Chin's point as well, that while government can formulate policy to try to nudge actions or nudge behavior towards a certain outcome, ultimately it also boils down to whether it makes economic sense for the developer to do so. If it does not make any economic sense, then in that case, you are also unlikely to see that realized. So the issue of second CBD, whether it's slow in progress or not, is not just a one-sided kind of issue. Many a times it's also depending on the private sector, whether are they willing to go in and in partnership with the government, one way or the other to redevelop some of the sites.
I just wanted to share some perspective also. I have been also talking to some of the architects because I mean, after COVID, what will happen to building designs and all, and I suppose it's also, there's a lot of publication out there in terms of the researches done by many professionals who are looking into the issue. Actually, the debate is still out there, whether, you know, with more people telecommuting and working from home, does it mean that then we will need less office space? I think there are varied views at this point in time. Many of them have expressed views in the sense that maybe not really, because even though, let's say, a large population of people or the working community could be working from home, but the office will still remain as a social collaboration space. And I mean, some trends that you may see is that you would see more plug and play workspaces for which people don't have a assigned table, but they will have a locker, and then they'll come in, use the space, collaborate with their co-workers, and then move on from there. But because of COVID and the heightened health and safety considerations, you may see the tables being spaced further apart. You will see more collaborative spaces for people, and all this would still take up the space that is the office spaces that are there. So I think it's too early in the trend to be able to tell whether, you know, because of COVID, your demand for office space will straightway fall. I think there's no clear evidence at this point in time, but of course, now with the current economic situation, I think that could also have an impact on the demand of office space. But I think that's a trend that we want to continue to observe and review. Yeah.
One of the very critical factors for the success of Singapore planning is actually the PPP, like private partnership. I think many of you have mentioned about this. In order to get a plan implemented, executed, you need really a very strong partnership between the public and private sector. I think this also go back to many of the questions raised, like for example, James talking about business amenity, talking about business innovation districts, and some of these, it really need a lot of, even CBDs, second CBD plan, you really need a lot of this partnership between the public and private sector. So during this pandemic period, how do you see this governments and the public sector relationship in terms of helping to overcome collectively some of these issues, and also how to put, public-private will be better able to cooperate to get some of these things still moving despite all this uncertainty?
Okay, maybe I go first. Definitely. I think specifically Claire talked about BIDs, which is the business improvement districts, right? Which we have involved stakeholders. We have been actively engaging stakeholders for various districts to work together with us to activate or to program spaces within the district and to draw in businesses for themselves. Like Marina Bay, even Tanjung Pagar and all. Definitely during COVID, we have seen a lot more collaboration. Even say, for example, Tanjung Pagar itself, Guaco Land is a key stakeholder there. And even during this period, they have also rallied their business partners in the area and their tenants together to work with us to jointly put in place programs, even initiatives that address the safety of their office tenants, but at the same time also to draw people in. I think that partnership, I believe that would grow stronger as time goes by. I mean, we are only on this starting journey of BIDs, and as in all partnerships, actually there is a lot of trust involved and goodwill involved in it. And as we become more familiar with each other, I only see that it should improve. I mean, that's my personal view, that there's a lot of opportunities that we can work with stakeholders to better improve districts and to make them more attractive districts.
Okay, to add to what Chin Chuan said, I think she summarized it quite well. Government is a big believer in ground-up initiatives. We are also big in terms of public engagement and consultation, especially when it comes to concerns places that involve the public. So where we see that the spaces are going to be really mainly used by the members of public, it does not make sense that the ideas are only germinating from the government side. We do need to see a greater collaboration with people in the community, with businesses, the local business community as well, to come up with win-win solutions and ideas to rejuvenate a space. And in fact, if you have seen in many of the developments which Chin Chin mentioned, and even in the way that sometimes we structure tender, we are also looking at not just purely on price today. We're looking at price and quality, concept, asking for design proposals. So these are all many ways that we are looking at ideas from the private sector coming through. Sometimes it may not be a case like what Tian Fu mentioned, that you have to be fiscally or financially invested in that development from the government through the strictest sense of PPP, but it can be in terms of proposals from the various parties that we can take into consideration and coming up with a more optimal solution that is inclusive, that will benefit the public who's going to use the space.
Thanks. I think there's another question. It's interesting. Just now, I think when you mentioned about win-win arrangement, I think during the pandemics, this question is about these agreements. I think the landlord and the tenants agreements.
Yeah.
How will these, how will the governments help to facilitate and try to balance some of these different interests between landlord and tenant agreement to make sure there will be a balanced kind of interest being managed between the landlord and tenant? Because I think it seems like he perceives that there is a lopsided kind of arrangement currently. What do you think?
Okay. I think everybody should have heard about the COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act introduced by the government, and it has in fact intervened in contractual agreements between the landlord and the tenants, and in various sectors, especially for example in event and tourism related type of contracts. Whether your deposit can be forfeited, whether do you need to comply with certain milestones, deliveries, because you're frustrated in terms of supply, disrupted supply chain. So these are already concrete examples of government taking active steps in terms of intervening in some of these contracts that are badly impacted by COVID. But going forward, where you are talking about formulation of new contracts, you are now aware of the situation and everybody knows what is the impact and what are the challenges that we are now facing. And that's where the negotiation, in that case, will be between the landlord and the tenant. But I do want to hear Mr. Liu, who has asked about this question, what aspect of, in terms of the lease term that he thinks that may not be in the favor, that are lopsided, that are weighed heavily in favor of the landlord, that he thinks would warrant a review, because some of these terms really is subject to negotiation between the landlord and the tenant. So I do want to hear what are some of these terms and conditions that Mr. Liu think that is there's a need for review.
Rent paying during the circuit breaker.
I see.
Okay. There's a rental relief.
There's a rental relief, yeah. That's part. It's also covered in part of the budgets.
Beyond the rental relief, right? And it is not just because of COVID-19 situations. From the government point, one of the parts about, if you're talking about rent, right, other than the other set of conditions within the contract, which is actually a negotiated ones and signed by willing parties, right? The other aspects that the government has been putting forth even before was to try to have some set of transparency in terms of even information, right? Prices, rentals, and stuff like that. It has been an ongoing effort to allow small businesses like SMEs and staff to be able to get hold of some of this broad information, right? To have a sense actually when they do negotiation and stuff, how do they go about doing it? So this has always been the government point. But of course, from COVID, within the government, there are also some associations or business telling us, no, government has to share more, right? The question then is, by sharing more, are we this information are given to us, like for example, from IREUS standpoint, we had information from stamping records and stuff like that, but they are given to us for our purpose, so when you're saying that, to open up, I think a lot of time it's not just the government effort lah. I think a lot of time is the industry effort. When we are talking about saying that, oh yes, there's a need for transparency and whatnot, can also the landlord comes into play and actually help, to allow to a certain expense of the information being shared and stuff like that, to allow the party, at the end of the day, it's more transparency, right? But sort of actually pinning down to very detailed level and stuff like that, which the government has been doing that. But it's just that from a identifiable data standpoint, confidentiality of data, all these are some things that the government has to consider and look at. But is there something that the private sectors can do something? These are also questions back to the entire industry lah. And it's not that always the time that the government would have a solution for all, right? But it's a concerted effort and joint effort lah, I think.
Thanks. I think just to wrap up this, maybe I'll just ask the speaker comments on this thing, because I think during the stable time, we always plan for a better place for live, play, and work. During a crisis like this, maybe the black swan event, governments and people start thinking about resilience, preparing for this crisis. So I think moving forward, we probably see this event, this sort of planning strategy to become more and more important, to have more flexibility, more resilient capacity, rather than planning just for better environment, better place to work, live, and play. So I think the other issue that I think not just Singapore, I think many countries are facing is, I think, the issue about aging. How will government actually respond to this issue about aging? How to plan for aging in place? How the strategy will be taking care of much longer term kind of challenges that we may face. From SLA, URA, and IREUS perspective, how this issue of aging will affect the policy in the future?
Firstly, aging, I think government has always been trying to encourage aging in place. So hopefully, it's also part and parcel of education exercise. It's not just about physical space where you try to age in your own homes, but it's also education, awareness program that we need to have an outreach program so that we push this message through. That said, there's also a need for, as you age, there will be problems, medical problems, and where you need dedicated care facilities. So that's where we had ramped up, government as a whole, had ramped up construction of certain healthcare step-down care facilities like nursing home, old folks homes, elder care facilities, daycare centers for the elderly. These are all the various physical space that the government has provided. So population, in fact, the trend of population is something that is really quite easy to predict, because by the population pyramid, roughly by which year how many people will be old folks with the certain life expectancy. You're able to calculate with certain precision and certainty your number of elderly folks, and then you plan accordingly backwards. Then if I need to, by this, let's say 2030, by 2050, there is X number of people who are aged 60 or 70 and above. And based on past trends, these are the times when this medical condition could set in, and that's where they will start to do certain functions and all that. Then you can start planning your medical facilities, your aged care facilities to look after the people. But it cannot be a case that government has to, that we plan a case of oversupply of such facility, because after all, land is scarce in Singapore, and which is why and also for many old folks, those that we have come across, many of them, unless they are really immobile, they would actually prefer to stay in their own home. As you're surrounded by your family members, you are in familiar grounds. You do not need to adapt to a new environment. And I think this is goes towards the well-being and mental well-being of the elderly folks. Again, that's my personal view.
The issue of aging is multifaceted. It's not just one aspect. Like what Wylin has said, there is the mental, which I think there are many agencies who are involved in programs for that. Then there is the physical, which Wylin has talked about in terms of the care facilities and the aging in place per se. And I mean, even for URA, we have been trying to pilot the retirement village kind of concept, which is really a pitch for people who are a little bit more well-able and able to live independently. But I think the current challenge seems to be is that the take-up, I mean, when we put forth a site for it, we closed the tender without awarding it for, and we are still assessing the reasons behind it. But that's things that we are trying to pilot. But while we do that for the private sector, actually that HDB site has done a great job when they developed their studio apartments, like Kampong Admiralty, for which the studio apartments are also developed above facilities that serve the residents. These are various models that are being experimented and tested and which helps to which helps to address our aging population, to allow them to be independent and to age in place. So these are many initiatives that are in place. Then of course, even we also try to prepare our Singapore residents financially, which I think maybe Pek Yen will be able to talk a little bit more. So it's really a multifaceted aspect of aging, and I think the challenge is not unique to Singapore. Many societies out there are also aging, and they are also good examples for us to see and observe what has worked and what has not worked so well, and that when we take it back to refine these models, it will help us to prepare us better for the future.
A lot of time from policy and stuff, policy for or programs that we come out, we have to be fine-tuned, right? Because the different generations of the aging will also differ, right? They are brought up in a different background and stuff like that. I mean, from COVID-19 is something that has accelerated a lot of things. That's why we had even digital ambassador, right? To help the slightly older ones to be able to get used to the digital platform, allowing them to know how more comfortable to use the different devices and stuff like that. But when say we have another different groups of the aging profile, that means that our strategies and our program will have to change accordingly, right? Because they are at different times. Their backgrounds are different. They are slightly more educated. You know, what are the things that they expect of? These are evolving changes, which whether from a hardcore, you know, physical point, or whether it's a soft part, I think that has always had to be fine-tuned and changed. For IREUS level, I guess when they are slightly off into a retirement age, they are not paying tax income and stuff, that will be a different thing. But I think a lot of things that we do as a government is help to get them along. I mean, we always say that, you know, we should be bringing everybody along, right, in a journey that we had. So all this comes into play as part of our design. But I guess a lot of things, not just whether it's old or whether, and including young, right? A lot of our students are here, you know, that mindset is quite critical. I think that also draws a lot of things. If your mindsets are, you know, in good old days, and you're not moving along, actually it's quite hard, right? So that is that soft part that a person would have, and be flexible, you know, have to change. Then we really had to make our changes. And the COVID situation shows that actually we can, as a human, actually we are quite, I mean, our willpower, right? If you have the willpower to make the change, actually you can achieve quite a fair bit of things. Yeah.
Claire has a related question in terms of why the push for nursing home. I think she also kind of answered her question in the sense that, is it to provide options? Yes, indeed so. And I think one of the reasons nursing home is differentiated from the other facilities is because in the nursing home, the residents there will need medical help. Whereas when we talk about the other aging in place, I think we are catering to elderly who are independent and do not need medical assistance on a daily basis, meaning that they can still take care of themselves. But whereas in the nursing home, it is to provide option for elderly residents for which they cannot take care of themselves and they need daily medical assistance. Yeah, so that's one key difference. I think she has one more about consultation in terms of public participation, and then is there a framework or guidelines or how do we take in feedback? Okay, I think I would just very concisely say that actually every feedback is being considered. I think sometimes certain feedback is relevant but maybe premature for adoption, and we will not be able to do so. But generally, if we engage certain groups on a specific issue and they are on a one-to-one basis, we do try to close the loop back with the participants who have given us that feedback. But it's just that when you talk about like master plan exhibition, where it's an open exhibition and people just give us their inputs, then those will be a bit difficult for us to go back to them on a one-to-one basis to close the loop. But where possible, we will want to try to close the loop with participants who've given us feedback. Yeah.
Thanks, three of you, Wai Ling, Jin Jin, and Pei Yan, who has very generously shared your opinions and also your views on from geopolitics to planning to even the valuation. It's an interesting session, and this will mark the end of our 11th series of NYL, Nurturing Young Leader webinar series on COVID-19. I hope participants enjoy all this session.